Have you ever thought you had everything, only to lose it all in one shocking moment? Imagine standing proud, showing off your perfect life, when suddenly the past walks in, stronger than ever. What would you do then? Trust me, this story will grab your heart. The ballroom glittered like a kingdom of glass. Crystal chandeliers rained light across marble floors, polished so perfectly they reflected the red soles of stiletto heels and the glossy black shoes of Manhattan's most powerful men. Waiters in white gloves moved with silent precision, balancing trays of champagne flutes that shimmered like liquid gold. Every corner of the room whispered of money, ambition, and ruthless competition. At the center of it all, Andrew Weston stood tall, his tuxedo cut to perfection, his arm linked proudly with a woman who looked like she had stepped straight out of a pageant crown ceremony. Lila Hart, the reigning Miss New York, smiled dazzlingly, her diamond earrings catching the light like stars. She was the embodiment of beauty, youth, and status, the kind of trophy Andrew always believed he deserved. He was laughing loudly, savoring the attention. Investors, media moguls, and city officials leaned in, eager to be in his orbit. Cameras flashed. Andrew had always wanted to be the man in control, the one with the perfect image. And tonight, he had it, or so he thought. "Gentlemen," Andrew declared, raising his glass high, his voice booming through the hall, "allow me to introduce the future Mrs. Weston. Isn't she breathtaking?" Applause scattered through the crowd. Lila blushed theatrically, pressing herself against him with a soft giggle. Whispers rippled among the guests. Everyone knew Andrew had divorced his wife only months earlier. To flaunt a beauty queen so soon felt shameless, but in this world of sharp smiles and sharper knives, scandal only made the spotlight brighter. "Andrew always lands on his feet," one banker murmured to another. "A man like him never loses." But beneath the glitter, not everyone was impressed. At the far edge of the ballroom, a few women exchanged knowing glances, shaking their heads in quiet disapproval. "His poor ex-wife," one whispered. "She's pregnant, isn't she? And he's already parading another woman." The murmurs grew, a silent undercurrent Andrew either didn't hear or chose to ignore. He raised his champagne once more, grinning smugly. "To new beginnings," he announced, sealing the moment with a kiss on Lila's lips as photographers snapped feverishly. It was the image Andrew had dreamed of: power, beauty, triumph. But fate was cruel. Because outside the glittering walls of the gala, another story was about to crash into his. At that exact moment, a sleek black limousine rolled across the private runway of LaGuardia's executive terminal. Its doors opened, and a figure emerged, elegant even in simplicity. Emma Weston, 6 months pregnant, stepped carefully onto the tarmac. A tailored ivory coat hugged her frame, the soft fabric draping gracefully over the swell of her belly. Her heels clicked against the pavement, steady and proud. The cold night air brushed against her cheeks, but Emma felt nothing but fire in her veins. For weeks she had hidden, nursing the wounds of betrayal, of abandonment, of humiliation. Tonight was different. Tonight she was no longer alone. Behind her, a towering figure exited the jet. Alexander Blackwell, the reclusive billionaire, whose empire stretched from Wall Street to Silicon Valley, walked beside her. His presence alone shifted the air. Broad-shouldered, immaculately dressed, and known for his ruthless intelligence, Alexander was the kind of man even Andrew Weston secretly feared. And now he rested his hand gently on the small of Emma's back, as if declaring to the world, "She is under my protection." Paparazzi stationed near the terminal gasped. Cameras erupted in bursts of light. Emma did not flinch. She lifted her chin, her dark eyes steady, her every step a declaration of defiance. Inside the ballroom, Andrew clinked glasses, his arrogance swelling. "This," he whispered to Lila, "is the night everyone remembers me as untouchable." But across the city, screens lit up with breaking news alerts. Exclusive: billionaire Alexander Blackwell arrives in New York with pregnant mystery woman. Social media exploded. Tweets, photos, rumors spiraled through the digital veins of Manhattan in seconds. Back at the gala, Andrew's phone buzzed relentlessly in his pocket. He ignored it, basking in the glow of admiration. But when one of his associates leaned over, his face pale, and muttered, "Andrew, you might want to look at this," the first crack split through his confidence. He glanced at the phone, his smirk faltering as he saw the photo. Emma, pregnant, glowing, and beside her Alexander Blackwell, his hand protectively guiding her. The headline blazed across the screen: "Forgotten Wife Returns with a Billionaire by Her Side." Andrew's grip on his champagne glass tightened, his laughter died in his throat. The room still glittered, but suddenly the lights felt too bright, the whispers too sharp, the ground too unsteady. For the first time in his life, Andrew Weston wasn't the man in control. And in less than an hour, the doors of the gala would swing open, and his carefully crafted empire would shatter in front of everyone he had tried so desperately to impress. Emma Weston had not always been a woman cloaked in scandal and whispers. Before her name was dragged through the tabloids, before the betrayal that left her gasping for breath in the dark, she was simply a woman who believed in love. She had grown up in a small town outside Pittsburgh, the daughter of a mechanic and a school teacher. Her childhood was modest, but filled with warmth. Her father's hands were always stained with oil, yet he still found time to sit at the kitchen table and help her with homework. Her mother's voice was gentle but firm, teaching Emma that strength was not loudness, it was endurance. Emma carried those lessons into adulthood. She didn't chase money or glittering parties. She chased kindness, laughter, the kind of love her parents had shown each other for 30 years. When she met Andrew Weston at a charity fundraiser in Manhattan, she thought she had found it. Andrew had been magnetic then. His tuxedo didn't hide the fact that he was still a man climbing the ladder, not yet the polished figure of Wall Street he would later become. He'd made her laugh with an offhand joke about the stuffy event. He'd looked at her like she was the only woman in the room. For Emma, who had just moved to the city to work as a flight attendant, it felt like fate. Within months, they were inseparable. Andrew swept her into a world she had never known. Dinners at rooftop restaurants, tickets to Broadway shows, walks down Fifth Avenue where he whispered promises of forever. She believed him. She believed every word. When he proposed in Central Park, down on one knee under the twinkle of fairy lights, Emma's answer had been instant. Yes. The wedding that followed was elegant, though not extravagant. Emma wanted something simple, something pure. She wore a lace gown her mother helped her choose, and as Andrew slipped the ring onto her finger, she thought she was stepping into the life she had always dreamed of. For a while, it was perfect. They lived in a cozy apartment in Chelsea. She brought home small souvenirs from her flights, postcards from Rome, chocolates from Zurich, tiny trinkets from Tokyo. Andrew would grin and say, "One day we'll go there together." Not on standby tickets, but in first class. Emma held on to that dream, never realizing that his hunger for more would one day consume them both. The cracks began slowly. Andrew worked longer hours, his phone buzzing at midnight, his eyes always on the next deal. Emma excused it. He was ambitious, she told herself. He wanted to give them a better life. But when she became pregnant, she expected him to soften, to remember the vows they made. Instead, the distance grew. He didn't touch her belly with awe the way she hoped. He didn't whisper to their unborn child. Instead, he grumbled about the cost of diapers, about how timing could have been better. Emma tried to ignore the sting of his words. She decorated the nursery alone, folding tiny clothes into drawers with trembling hands, whispering to the baby that everything would be okay. But then came the rumors. She overheard colleagues mentioning Andrew's late nights with a certain beauty queen turned consultant. At first, Emma refused to believe it. She had faith in him, faith in their love. She told herself gossip was cruel and baseless, but the truth was crueler. The night she found the lipstick-stained cufflink in his briefcase was the night her world collapsed. Andrew didn't even bother to lie convincingly. He shrugged, saying, "Emma, don't be dramatic. Men like me are expected to have beautiful women around. You'll always be the mother of my child, but Lila, she's my future." The words cut deeper than any blade. He didn't just cheat. He discarded her. And worst of all, he did it when she was 6 months pregnant, when she was at her most vulnerable. Emma left that night. She packed a small suitcase, tears streaming down her face, and moved into a friend's spare room in Brooklyn. She thought she would crumble, that she would fade into the shadows, but every kick from the baby inside her reminded her she had to survive. She had to fight, not for Andrew, but for herself and the tiny life that depended on her. She took part-time work helping at a bookstore, her belly slowing her movements, but not her determination. She ignored the whispers, the pitying looks from neighbors who had seen the headlines about Andrew and his glamorous new fiancée. She told herself she didn't need revenge, she only needed peace. And yet, deep down, a flame burned. A quiet vow she whispered in the silence of her small rented room. One day they will see. One day I will not be the woman they pity. I will be the woman they regret losing. That vow grew stronger the night she received an unexpected call. It was from Alexander Blackwell, a man whose name alone sent tremors through boardrooms. They had met once, briefly, at a charity dinner Andrew had dragged her to years ago. She barely remembered the details, but apparently he had remembered her. "Emma," his voice was calm but commanding. "I hear you've been through challenges. I have a proposition. I need someone with grace, with resilience, someone who can stand beside me at events. I believe that person is you." Emma was stunned. Why would a billionaire seek her out? She was just a pregnant woman trying to piece her life back together. But Alexander saw something in her that she had forgotten. Strength, dignity, the quiet kind of power that could not be erased by betrayal. That night, as she lay awake, Emma felt something shift. For the first time since Andrew's betrayal, she didn't feel broken. She felt chosen. And when Alexander's private jet arrived to take her to New York for the gala, she understood. This was her moment. She wasn't walking into a ballroom as Andrew's discarded wife. She was stepping in as a woman reborn, a mother-to-be with a billionaire ally by her side. And when the doors opened, she knew Andrew would see her not as the woman he left behind, but as the woman he could never have again. The Bright Futures Charity Gala was not just another evening of champagne and glitter. It was the event of the season. For New York's elite, attendance was not optional. It was a declaration of power, a chance to be photographed, quoted, and remembered. To miss it was to admit irrelevance. The venue itself was a masterpiece of opulence. The Grand Renaissance Hotel, a towering structure in the heart of Manhattan that had hosted presidents, royalty, and moguls. Its ballroom was a cavern of light, with chandeliers dripping crystals like frozen waterfalls, gilded archways carved with Renaissance angels, and a floor wide enough to host 100 couples dancing without ever brushing sleeves. That night, the air was thick with perfume and ambition. Waiters floated between clusters of guests, trays of caviar-topped blinis and golden champagne flutes held like treasures. A string quartet played Mozart near the staircase, the sound weaving through the conversations of men in tuxedos and women in gowns worth more than most homes. Everywhere you looked, there were symbols of wealth. The women wore diamonds the size of raindrops. The men compared watches, whispered about mergers, and boasted of deals closed over golf in the Hamptons. And yet, beneath the sparkle, there was always competition. Every smile was measured, every compliment layered with calculation. At the center of it all stood Andrew Weston. He relished nights like this. To him, the gala was not about charity, but about conquest. He wanted every camera flash, every glance, every whisper of admiration. He had spent weeks preparing his moment, and tonight he was ready. His fiancée, Lila Hart, looked radiant in a sequined gown of pale gold that clung to her frame. Her crown as a former Miss New York was not on her head, but the aura of it surrounded her. She was young, glamorous, and dazzling. Everything Andrew wanted the world to see at his side. The two of them worked the room like performers on stage. Andrew laughed loudly at jokes, clapped shoulders, shook hands, and let Lila twirl under the chandeliers like a prized possession. Investors smiled at him approvingly. Socialites whispered that he was moving up in the world. And for a brief moment, Andrew believed it, that he had truly erased the past and rewritten himself into perfection. But whispers are treacherous things. In one corner, a pair of older women clutched their pearls, shaking their heads. "His poor wife," one muttered. "Still pregnant, isn't she? And he brings this girl here as if nothing happened." A man standing nearby added, "I heard he barely gave her anything in the divorce, left her with scraps while he flaunts a beauty queen." Typical Andrew Weston. The murmurs traveled, weaving through the room like smoke. Andrew didn't hear them at first, but they were there, gnawing at the edges of his performance. Meanwhile, the gala itself carried on. Cameras flashed. A politician made a speech about the importance of education for underprivileged children. Guests applauded politely, then returned to their conversations about yachts, private islands, and Wall Street triumphs. The orchestra swelled into a waltz. Couples drifted to the floor, gowns sweeping like waves, tuxedos gliding with precision. Andrew led Lila into the center, his hand possessive at the small of her back. They twirled under the lights, the perfect picture of wealth and romance. But as Andrew spun her, his eyes caught the entrance doors. A murmur was moving through the crowd near the staircase. Phones began to buzz. Heads turned. Someone was coming. For a heartbeat, Andrew ignored it. He tightened his hold on Lila, forcing a smile for the cameras. But he felt it, the shift in the room, the sudden hush, the ripple of tension cutting through the music. And then he saw her. The grand doors swung open, and Emma Weston stepped inside. The room gasped as one. She was radiant in a simple ivory gown, her belly a visible curve of motherhood, her posture regal despite it. Every step she took echoed across the marble, her heels clicking with defiance. She didn't look broken, she didn't look discarded, she looked untouchable. Beside her, towering and composed, walked Alexander Blackwell. His presence alone silenced conversations. He was a man who rarely appeared in public. A billionaire whispered about in awe and fear. Tonight, he was here, and his hand rested protectively on Emma's back. The photographers reacted instantly. Flashes blinded the ballroom as cameras swiveled from Andrew and Lila to Emma and Alexander. Reporters scribbled furiously. Guests whispered louder, their curiosity turning into electric fascination. Andrew froze mid-step. His grip on Lila faltered. His face, once smug and confident, drained of color. He could not process what he was seeing. Emma, his pregnant ex-wife, was supposed to be gone, forgotten, invisible. And yet here she was, walking into the same ballroom he thought he owned, glowing under the lights, escorted by the very man who could destroy him with a single word. Lila tugged on his arm, whispering, "Andrew, what's wrong?" But his eyes stayed locked on Emma, his heart pounding. The room was no longer his, it was hers. The orchestra stumbled, the music faltering as the conductor glanced at the spectacle overtaking the night. Guests surged to the edges of the floor, craning for a better view. The whispers became a roar. "Is that Emma Weston? She's with Alexander Blackwell. My God, she looks incredible." Andrew's finished, absolutely finished. And in that moment, Andrew felt something he had never felt before in his life: fear. Because Emma hadn't just returned, she had returned stronger. And she wasn't alone. Andrew Weston had always believed he was born to conquer. From the time he was a boy, he craved attention, craved the feeling of walking into a room and watching people adjust themselves to his presence. For years, Emma had fueled that need, standing quietly beside him, her humility making him appear larger. But Andrew was never satisfied with quiet loyalty. He wanted glitter, drama, applause. Lila Hart was everything Emma wasn't, and that was exactly why Andrew chose her. Lila thrived in the spotlight. Even before she won her beauty queen crown, she was addicted to the rush of cameras flashing, of strangers whispering her name. When she first met Andrew at a Wall Street gala, she saw him not just as a man, but as a ladder. His tailored tuxedo, his expensive watch, his smooth words. He was a ticket to something bigger. Andrew was equally enthralled. Lila wasn't subtle or patient. She was bold. She laughed loudly, touched his arm in public, and made sure every eye in the room saw them together. For a man who craved recognition, it was intoxicating. By the time Andrew's marriage was unraveling, Lila had already slid into his life like she owned it. She mocked Emma's simple clothes, ridiculed her modest upbringing, and whispered in Andrew's ear that he deserved more. And Andrew, blinded by his ego, listened. Now, standing in the grand Renaissance ballroom with Lila at his side, Andrew believed he had finally won. He was flaunting her like a trophy, the kind of woman who turned heads and sparked envy. Every glance, every whisper of admiration made him feel taller, richer, untouchable. But the truth was uglier. Andrew was reckless. He spent money he didn't have, borrowing from investors to fund his lavish lifestyle. He promised Lila penthouses, designer gowns, and diamond bracelets, even as his accounts bled dry. She demanded more, and he gave more, desperate to keep her satisfied. He told himself it was love, but in reality, it was addiction. Lila knew it too. Behind her dazzling smile, she saw the cracks. She had no loyalty to Andrew's character, only to his wealth and the doors he could open. When she looked at him, she didn't see a partner. She saw a stepping stone. And Andrew was too blinded by vanity to realize it. Earlier that evening, before Emma's shocking entrance, Lila had whispered into his ear as they danced. "Do you see the way they're all watching me?" she asked, her lips brushing against his cheek. "Yes," Andrew smirked, pride swelling in his chest. "That's because I'm the upgrade," Lila said sweetly, though her words carried a sting. "No one even remembers your ex-wife. She was invisible. I'm unforgettable." Andrew laughed, thinking it was flirtation. He didn't realize it was a dagger wrapped in velvet. But then Emma walked in and everything shifted. Lila noticed before Andrew did. The moment the whispers began, the way the photographers turned their cameras, she felt her grip on the room slipping. And when she turned to see Emma, pregnant, radiant, and walking beside Alexander Blackwell, her smile faltered. "Who is she with?" Lila hissed, her nails digging into Andrew's arm. Andrew couldn't answer. His jaw tightened, his eyes locked on the scene unfolding before him. He saw not just Emma, but Alexander, his competitor, his superior, a man he could never outshine, and together they looked untouchable. Lila forced a laugh, though it was brittle. "Relax, darling. She's nothing. Just your ex-wife. People will forget her soon enough." But she didn't believe her own words. She knew the power of optics, the way a single image could spread like wildfire. And right now, the image of Emma, glowing and strong beside a billionaire, was already eclipsing her own sequined gown and perfect smile. The crowd's whispers grew louder. "She looks incredible. Alexander Blackwell doesn't just appear with anyone. She's pregnant, and yet she looks more regal than Lila ever has." Andrew's face flushed. Rage burned in his chest, mixing with fear. He squeezed Lila's hand tighter, as if clinging to the only piece of dignity he had left. But his grip betrayed desperation, not confidence. Lila pulled away slightly, her eyes narrowing. She had no intention of going down with him if his empire crumbled. Her loyalty was as thin as her patience. Still, Andrew tried to regain control. He straightened his shoulders, forcing a smile as he whispered to her, "Don't let them see weakness. Tonight is still ours." But even as he spoke, the cameras swung fully toward Emma and Alexander. No one was watching Andrew anymore. No one cared about his smug grin or Lila's beauty queen crown. The story had shifted. Andrew's arrogance cracked under the weight of it. The man who had once declared, "She'll beg to come back," now found himself trembling at the sight of the woman he discarded standing taller than ever. And worse, Andrew knew Emma hadn't returned alone. She had returned with power he could never match. And within minutes, Alexander Blackwell would step to the microphone, and Andrew's carefully crafted kingdom would begin to crumble before the entire world. The ballroom, once buzzing with laughter and shallow conversation, had fallen into a heavy, breathless silence. Only the sharp clicks of cameras punctured the air. Everyone's attention was riveted on the woman who had just walked in, the woman Andrew Weston thought he had erased from his story forever. Emma Weston stood beneath the golden chandeliers, her ivory gown glowing like moonlight against the marble floors. Her pregnancy was visible, yet instead of making her appear fragile, it gave her an aura of strength, as though she carried not just a child, but justice itself. At her side, Alexander Blackwell was a towering presence. His tailored suit was understated but flawless, his expression calm, his hand resting on Emma's back with quiet authority. He wasn't simply her escort, he was a shield, a declaration, a warning. The crowd parted instinctively as they walked forward. Whispers swelled, building into a storm. "Is that Emma Weston? I thought she disappeared. She looks radiant. Look at her glow. And she's with Alexander Blackwell. My God." Andrew's world was tilting. He had been standing in the center of the dance floor with Lila, his chest puffed like a peacock. Now he felt small, invisible. His champagne glass trembled in his hand. His smile was gone, replaced with the stiff jaw of a man watching everything slip through his fingers. Lila leaned closer, forcing a smile though her nails dug into Andrew's arm. "Darling," she whispered, "everyone is watching. Don't you dare look weak." But it was too late. The MC, a well-known society journalist, cleared his throat nervously at the microphone. His eyes flicked between Andrew and the entrance. "Ladies and gentlemen," he stammered, "please welcome Mr. Alexander Blackwell and his guest, Mrs. Emma Weston." The ballroom erupted. Applause thundered through the room, not polite but explosive, as though the entire elite of New York had been waiting for this moment. Photographers swarmed, flashes bursting like lightning. Reporters pushed forward, shouting questions. "Mrs. Weston, how does it feel to return?" "Mr. Blackwell, are you two a couple?" "Andrew, did you know she was coming tonight?" The questions hit Andrew like bullets. His face burned. Lila tried to laugh it off, waving her hand dramatically, but her smile faltered as she realized the cameras weren't on her. They weren't even on Andrew. Every lens, every flash, every word was focused on Emma. Emma did not answer the questions. She didn't need to. She simply walked forward, her posture regal, her chin high. Her silence was more powerful than any statement. It told the world she was not broken. She was not begging. She was rising. Andrew snapped. He stormed toward her, dragging Lila behind him, his voice trembling with forced bravado. "Emma, what is the meaning of this? You show up here, parading yourself like this?" The room hushed again. All eyes turned to them. Andrew's words echoed, harsh and cruel. Emma stopped walking. Slowly she turned to face him. Her eyes, dark and steady, locked on his. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, in a calm, clear voice that carried across the hall, she answered. "Parading myself?" she repeated. "You flaunted your mistress when I was carrying your child. You humiliated me, and now you dare to accuse me for simply existing?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. The truth, whispered for months, was now spoken aloud for everyone to hear. Reporters scribbled furiously. Guests leaned closer, their eyes wide. Andrew's face went crimson. "Don't twist this. You were never enough, Emma. You never belonged in my world." A murmur of disapproval swept the ballroom. Even Lila flinched at his words. The women in the crowd exchanged looks of disgust. Men shifted uncomfortably. His arrogance, once magnetic, was now repulsive. Emma stepped closer, her voice steady, her hand resting gently on her belly. "No, Andrew. It wasn't me who wasn't enough. It was you. You couldn't see what you had. You threw away loyalty, love, and family, for vanity, for greed." "Bah!" She flicked her eyes at Lila, who shrank under the attention. The crowd erupted in whispers again, this time sharper, judgmental, disgusting. She stood by him and he abandoned her pregnant. What a fool. Andrew's mouth opened, but no words came. His empire of pride was collapsing in real time, and everyone was watching. At that moment, Alexander stepped forward. His deep voice carried authority that silenced the whispers instantly. "This woman," he said, gesturing to Emma, "is not to be pitied. She is to be respected. She has endured what most could not, and she stands stronger than ever. I will not allow her to be shamed any longer." The ballroom roared with applause. Guests rose from their seats, clapping, some even cheering. Emma stood motionless, tears shimmering in her eyes, but not tears of sorrow. They were tears of vindication. Andrew's face twisted. He tried to shout over the applause. "This is my night, my gala, you can't." But no one was listening. The cameras ignored him. The applause drowned him out. His desperate cries fell into emptiness. Lila pulled her arm free from his grip, her eyes narrowing. She could see the tide had turned, and she would not go down with him. She slipped away toward the bar, leaving Andrew alone in the spotlight that no longer wanted him. For the first time, Andrew Weston realized he wasn't the hero of the story. He was the villain. And villains don't get applause. And when Alexander whispered something to the MC, the man nodded and prepared to hand Emma the microphone. The moment was coming when she would speak her truth, and nothing in the world could stop her. The applause still thundered in Emma's ears long after she stepped off the ballroom floor. She had stood tall in front of the people who once pitied her, spoken with a voice steady enough to make even Andrew tremble. But the moment the doors closed behind her, away from the cameras and the crowd, the weight of it all came crashing down. Emma pressed her back against the cool marble wall of the private hallway. Her chest heaved, her hands trembling. The strength she had carried like armor slipped away, revealing the fragile truth underneath. She wasn't invincible. She was a woman 6 months pregnant, exhausted, humiliated, and afraid. Her breaths came fast and shallow. She wrapped her arms around her belly, whispering to the life inside her. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm trying. I'm so tired, but I'm trying." For weeks, she had prepared herself for this moment, the confrontation, the spectacle, the reckoning. But no amount of preparation could erase the years of pain Andrew had left behind. The sound of his cruel voice, "You were never enough," echoed in her mind like a wound reopening. Tears spilled over. She pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. But it came anyway, raw and aching. She slid down the wall to the floor, her gown pooling around her, her shoulders shaking. This was the part no one saw, the collapse behind the curtain, the quiet unraveling after the applause. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen through blurred vision. Dozens of messages from unknown numbers, journalists, gossip bloggers. Screenshots of headlines already spreading. Emma Weston returns in style. Pregnant and powerful, the woman who stole the gala. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt hollow. Fame was not what she wanted. All she had ever wanted was a husband who cherished her, a home filled with love, and a safe world for her child. Instead, she had been left with betrayal, whispers, and now the unbearable glare of the spotlight. A hand touched her shoulder gently. Emma, she looked up. Alexander Blackwell stood over her, his face etched with something few ever saw in him, concern. The world knew him as ruthless, cold, untouchable. But tonight, in this hallway, he was simply a man looking at a woman who had given too much and broken in silence. "You don't have to do this alone," he said softly. Emma tried to smile through her tears. "I wanted to be strong. In there I felt it. But now, I feel like I can't breathe." Alexander crouched beside her, his hand steady on her arm. "Strength isn't never breaking, Emma. Strength is breaking, and still choosing to stand up again." His words pierced through her panic. She looked into his eyes, searching for judgment, pity, anything that would make her feel smaller. But all she found was respect. "I hate him," she whispered. "I hate Andrew for what he did, and I hate myself for still feeling hurt by him." "You loved him," Alexander replied. "You gave him your trust, your loyalty, your future. Betrayal doesn't erase love overnight, but it will, eventually. And when it does, all that will remain is the woman you are becoming right now." Emma's sobs softened. She leaned her head back against the wall, closing her eyes. The sound of the ballroom beyond was muffled here, but she knew the world hadn't stopped. Andrew was probably raging, Lila scheming, reporters crafting tomorrow's front pages. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to curl up and let the world forget her again. But then she felt it. The gentle kick of her baby inside her. A reminder, a reason, a vow. Her child deserved a mother who stood tall. Not one who vanished into shadows. "I don't know if I can face them again," she admitted. "What if I fall apart in front of them?" Alexander's hand tightened slightly on her arm. "Then fall apart, and then rise. That's what they'll remember. Not your tears, but the way you rise after them." For a long moment they sat in silence, the billionaire and the betrayed wife, two figures from different worlds bound by a single truth: survival. Emma wiped her eyes, her breathing steadier now. She adjusted her gown, placed her hand over her belly again, and whispered, "We're going to be okay, I promise." She stood, slowly but with determination. Alexander rose with her, offering his arm. She took it, not as a crutch, but as an alliance. "Ready?" he asked. Emma hesitated. Then she nodded. "Yes, I'm ready." But as they prepared to re-enter the ballroom, the doors opened suddenly. A journalist, red-faced and panting, rushed in, clutching his phone. He froze when he saw them, his eyes wide with the kind of excitement that only came from breaking news. "I don't mean to intrude," he stammered, "but you should know. It's everywhere. Social media, the networks, Andrew's private texts with Lila, leaked, screenshots of him mocking you while you were pregnant. It's trending worldwide. Everyone knows the truth now." Emma's heart lurched, and in that instant, she realized the humiliation was no longer hers. It was Andrew's. The world had just turned against him, and the night was far from over. The air in the private hallway was heavy with the journalist's words. Emma stood frozen, her heart pounding as if trying to catch up with what she had just heard. Andrew's texts, mocking her, ridiculing her pregnancy, bragging about discarding her, were everywhere. The whispers of betrayal that once tormented her in silence had now become headlines blazing across the world. The journalist, flustered but eager, held up his phone. "It's trending on every platform. Hashtags, news alerts, blogs, everyone's covering it. He called you. Dead weight. Said your pregnancy made you unappealing. He bragged that Lila was his real future. And it's not just texts, there are voice recordings too." Emma's stomach twisted. She felt the sting of those words all over again. The wounds Andrew left hadn't fully healed, and now the world was peeling them open. But as her chest tightened, she noticed something else, a strange, quiet calm. Because for the first time, the humiliation wasn't hers, it was his. Alexander took the phone, his jaw tightening as he read. Pathetic, he muttered. His eyes flicked to Emma, sharp and steady. This isn't weakness, Emma. This is leverage. Emma frowned. Leverage? Alexander nodded. Andrew built his empire on image. Investors, partners, politicians, they don't care about his morals, but they care about scandal. A man who mocks his pregnant wife publicly while flaunting a mistress? His credibility is finished. These texts aren't just gossip, they're dynamite. The journalist, sensing the storm he had ignited, stammered, Everyone's waiting for your response, Mrs. Weston. Do you have a statement? Emma hesitated. Her hands trembled as she remembered nights crying into her pillow, whispering apologies to her unborn child for the chaos. Now she had the chance to turn all of it into something more than pain. But could she? Before she could answer, Alexander's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his expression darkened. It's worse than we thought, he said quietly. Andrew's emails just leaked too. Financial records, fraud, shady loans, fake charity donations. The sharks are circling. Emma blinked, stunned. Fraud? You mean he could go to prison? Alexander's eyes locked on hers. If these documents are real, and they look very real, then yes. And Emma, do you realize what this means? Her breath caught. She hadn't wanted revenge. All she had wanted was dignity, a chance to show her child she hadn't been broken. But now, the universe seemed to be handing her something far bigger. Not just survival. Justice. The journalist's phone buzzed again. He glanced down, his eyes going wide. Oh my God, there's more. Emma, there's a document circulating, a prenup, with Andrew's signature. It says if he betrays you, if he abandons you during pregnancy, you're entitled to half of everything. Emma's knees nearly buckled. That's impossible. He told me we never signed a prenup. Alexander's eyes narrowed. Did you? Emma searched her memory. Their wedding day had been a blur of flowers, laughter, vows. She remembered signing papers, marriage license, legal documents, but she had been so swept up she hadn't noticed what else Andrew had slipped in. Could it be true? The journalist turned the screen toward her. It's everywhere now. Some say it's fake, others swear it's authentic. But the signature, it's clearly his. Emma's heart raced. If the prenup was real, then Andrew hadn't just underestimated her. He had destroyed himself with his own arrogance. Alexander's voice was low, steady, a lifeline in the storm. Emma, listen to me. This is your moment. You hold the power now, not just because of me, not because of the press, but because Andrew's empire is crumbling under the weight of his own sins. You don't have to run anymore. You can face him, and you can win. Emma's hands tightened over her belly. She thought of every sleepless night, every cruel word, every moment she had doubted herself. She thought of her parents, who had taught her endurance. She thought of her child, who would one day ask about this moment. And suddenly clarity settled over her. I'm not hiding anymore, she whispered. The journalist leaned forward eagerly. So you'll give a statement? Emma straightened, her tears gone, her voice firm. Yes, but not just words. The world deserves to hear the truth from me tonight. Alexander smiled faintly, a rare glimmer of pride softening his stern features. Then let's give them a night they'll never forget. The journalist hurried off to prepare his breaking story, leaving Emma and Alexander in the quiet hallway. Emma steadied her breath, her mind racing not with fear but with purpose. She had thought the gala would be Andrew's victory lap. Instead, it had become his trial. The doors to the ballroom loomed before her. Beyond them waited the press, the elite, the very people who had once pitied her. And somewhere inside, Andrew Weston, furious, desperate, terrified, was clinging to the last shreds of his reputation. Emma placed a hand over her belly once more. This isn't just for me anymore, she whispered. This is for us. Alexander extended his arm. Ready? Emma nodded. Yes, let's end this. They stepped toward the doors. The music inside had quieted, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. The crowd was waiting, the cameras were ready, and as the doors creaked open, Emma Weston walked back into the ballroom, not as a discarded wife, not as a victim, but as a woman about to shatter the man who betrayed her. And when she reached for the microphone, the room fell silent, waiting for the words that would change everything. The ballroom fell into silence as Emma Weston stood at the center, her hand lightly gripping the microphone. The same chandeliers that once illuminated Andrew's smug grin now poured their light over her, casting her in a glow that felt almost divine. For a moment, She simply stood there, breathing. Her heart thundered, her palms damp. But then, as her eyes scanned the sea of faces, wealthy investors, high society wives, journalists with pens poised, she realized something profound. They weren't looking at her with pity anymore. They were looking at her with expectation, with awe. Emma drew in a breath. "Many of you know me as Emma Weston," she began, her voice clear, steady. "Some of you remember me as the quiet wife who stood behind Andrew at galas like this, the one who smiled politely, said little, and disappeared into the background." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Emma continued, "But I am not that woman anymore. Tonight I stand here not as Andrew's wife, not as his ex-wife, but as myself, as a mother, as a woman who has been betrayed, humiliated, discarded, and yet still standing." The words rang through the hall like a bell. Some guests leaned forward captivated. Others clapped softly in approval. Emma pressed on. "When a man betrays his family, he does not just betray his wife. He betrays the vows he made before God, the trust of the community, and the dignity of the very child he should protect. Andrew Weston may have thought he was leaving me behind, but in truth, he left behind his own honor." All eyes shifted toward Andrew. He stood rigid near the dance floor, his face pale, his fists clenched. Lila hovered beside him, no longer the dazzling fiancée, but a shadow shrinking under the weight of judgment. Emma turned her gaze back to the crowd. "For months, I thought I was weak. I thought I was unworthy. I cried alone. I hid. I questioned everything about myself. But then I realized weakness is not crying. Weakness is a man who cannot keep his vows. Weakness is a man who chooses vanity over family. And tonight, the world knows his weakness, not mine." Thunderous applause shook the room. Cameras flashed wildly. The journalists who had once ignored her were now scribbling furiously, capturing every word. Alexander Blackwell stood in the background, watching. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes gleamed with pride. He had seen her break in the hallway. Now he was watching her rise, not because of him, but because of her own fire. Emma raised her chin higher. "To every woman in this room who has ever been silenced, dismissed, or made to feel small, this is not the end. We are not defined by the men who betray us. We are defined by how we rise after betrayal." The women in the audience erupted in cheers. Some stood, clapping loudly, tears glistening in their eyes. The men shifted uneasily, some clapping, others whispering nervously as Andrew's reputation sank lower with every second. Andrew couldn't take it anymore. He stormed forward, shouting, "Enough! This is a circus. Emma, you're making a fool of yourself." Emma turned, her eyes locking on his. For the first time, she did not flinch. "No, Andrew," she said firmly, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "The fool is the man who thought he could throw away a wife, a mother, and a family, and still stand here expecting applause." The crowd roared. Andrew's face twisted in rage, but even Lila slipped her arm from his grasp, stepping back to avoid being dragged into his downfall. Emma took a step closer to the microphone, her hand resting on her belly. "This child inside me will one day ask about this moment, and I will tell them. I was betrayed, but I did not break. I was cast aside, but I found my strength. I stood tall and I claimed the dignity that was mine all along." The applause was deafening. Emma felt it wash over her like a tide, filling the cracks inside her heart with something new. Pride. Not pride in her beauty, not in wealth or power, but in survival, in dignity, in transformation. The music swelled as the orchestra almost instinctively began to play again. But this time, it wasn't for Andrew. It was for her. Emma turned, handing the microphone back to the MC. She no longer needed it. Her message had been delivered. The crowd was hers. Alexander stepped forward, offering his arm. She took it, but not as a woman leaning on a man for strength. She took it as an equal, a partner. Together they descended the steps from the stage, the crowd parting like waves. Andrew shouted again, desperate. "You think you've won, Emma? This isn't over. You'll regret this." Emma paused, turning just enough to look at him over her shoulder. Her voice was soft, but sharp enough to cut through the noise. "The only one who will regret anything tonight, Andrew, is you." The crowd gasped. Andrew's rage boiled over, but his words were drowned by the thunderous applause that followed Emma out of the spotlight. And yet, as Emma walked toward the exit, her transformation complete, a nagging thought tugged at her heart. The battle wasn't over. Not yet. Andrew was desperate. dangerous, and cornered. And a man like that would not go down quietly, because in the shadows of the gala, Andrew was already plotting his revenge, a move so reckless it could shatter everything Emma had just built. The echoes of applause still vibrated through the grand Renaissance ballroom, but Andrew Weston heard none of it. His ears rang with humiliation. His ex-wife, the woman he had dismissed as weak and invisible, had just taken the very stage he once believed belonged to him, and the crowd had chosen her. He clenched his fists, his nails biting into his palms. Rage boiled in his veins, but underneath it pulsed fear. He knew what was happening outside those gilded walls. Social media was tearing him apart. Investors were texting each other, reconsidering partnerships. His polished image was crumbling faster than he could contain. Yet Andrew Weston was not a man who surrendered. If he was going down, he planned to drag Emma with him. "Excuse me," he barked, snatching the microphone from the MC's trembling hands. "I won't let lies ruin me." The ballroom fell into uneasy silence. Some guests rolled their eyes. Others raised their phones higher, ready to capture every second. Andrew's voice shook with fury. "You all worship her, because she walks in here with Blackwell at her side, glowing like some kind of saint. But don't be fooled. Emma is no victim. She's a schemer. She knew exactly what she was doing when she latched onto me. And now she's latched onto him." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Andrew's voice rose louder, desperate. "She wants your sympathy. But the truth is, she's nothing without men to carry her. First me, now Blackwell. She doesn't stand on her own. She never has." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. For a moment, Emma felt her stomach twist. He knew exactly where to stab, in the place where her insecurities still lingered. But then, from the corner of her eye, she saw Alexander step forward. He didn't reach for the microphone. He didn't shout. He simply pulled a sleek black folder from his briefcase and handed it to a man near the front, the head of the gala's board of trustees. The man's eyes widened as he scanned the papers. Gasps spread like wildfire. Emma's voice rang clear across the hall. "You want to talk about truth, Andrew? Then let's talk about yours." She gestured to the board member, who now held the damning documents. "Those papers contain records of your fraudulent transactions, fake charity donations, money laundered through shell accounts. While I decorated a nursery alone, you were stealing from the very causes you pretended to support." The crowd erupted in chaos. Guests turned on Andrew, their admiration transforming into disgust. Phones flashed as cameras zoomed in on the documents. Emma's voice didn't waver. "And as for me, latching on to men, I built my strength when you abandoned me. I worked when you cut me off. I survived when you mocked me. And tonight, I stand here not because of a man, but because you underestimated me." The applause roared like thunder. Emma's words had landed like arrows, each one piercing Andrew's carefully crafted mask. But the real blow was yet to come. Alexander stepped forward, his deep voice carrying authority. "And in case anyone doubts the validity of these records, I've already forwarded them to federal investigators. By morning, Andrew Weston will not be walking into another ballroom. He'll be walking into a courtroom." The room gasped as one. Reporters rushed to file breaking news. Some guests cheered outright, others whispered in shock. Andrew's face contorted, his composure shattered. He tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. He looked to Lila for support, but she had already slipped to the far side of the room, distancing herself from his downfall. Emma took one final step forward, her hand resting on her belly, her voice soft but sharp. "You once told me I wasn't enough. Tonight, the world sees the truth. It wasn't me who wasn't enough. It was you. And you always will be." The crowd rose to its feet. The applause thundered, louder than anything the ballroom had ever heard. Tears blurred Emma's vision, but they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of release, of victory, of justice finally delivered. Andrew staggered back, his body trembling. He had no words left, no defenses, no allies. Only the cold stare of hundreds of eyes watching his empire crumble. Security began to move forward, summoned by a quiet nod from Alexander. The gala would continue without Andrew Weston. His time was over. Emma, overwhelmed by the noise, let out a shaky breath. She had dreamed of this moment: vindication, justice, freedom. And yet, as the applause swelled around her, she felt something unexpected. Peace. She wasn't standing here to prove Andrew wrong anymore. She was standing here to prove herself right. But just as the relief washed over her, she caught sight of Andrew one last time. His face was twisted with rage, but behind his eyes flickered something dangerous. Desperation. And Emma realized with a chill that a man cornered, humiliated, and exposed was capable of anything, even something that could put her and her unborn child in danger. The ballroom was still buzzing with chaos when security closed in on Andrew Weston. His once flawless tuxedo looked wrinkled under the sweat dripping down his temples, his perfect mask of confidence shattered. People who once shook his hand eagerly now stepped back as though he carried a plague. His name, once spoken with admiration, had become poison in the air. Andrew's voice cracked as he shouted, "You can't do this to me! I built everything! I'm Andrew Weston! Do you hear me? I won't fall!" But no one listened. Not anymore. Reporters captured every desperate word, every trembling step, while whispers filled the room like thunder. His empire was gone, and everyone could see it. Emma stood still, her hand resting on her rounded belly, her chest rising and falling with deep breaths. For years she had endured Andrew's cruelty in silence. Now she watched him unravel in front of the very crowd he had tried to impress. And for the first time, she felt no fear, only closure. Alexander stepped to her side, his hand brushing hers. He leaned close and whispered, "It's over. He can't touch you again." Emma nodded, though her eyes stayed on Andrew. She needed to see this end. Not because she wanted revenge, but because she wanted finality. Security reached him. Andrew tried to pull away, shouting, "Emma, you'll regret this. I'll destroy you." His voice cracked, pathetic now. Emma met his eyes one last time. Her voice was calm, steady. "You already destroyed yourself, Andrew, and you'll have to live with that." The crowd erupted into cheers, applause, and shouts of support. Cameras flashed as Andrew was escorted out of the ballroom, his protests drowned by the roar of voices celebrating his downfall. When the doors slammed behind him, silence filled the space again. But this silence was different. It wasn't heavy with fear. It was alive with respect, admiration, even hope. The MC, shaken but composed, returned to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight was meant to be about charity, about giving hope to those who need it most. And perhaps in a way, we have all witnessed a lesson in resilience, dignity, and justice." The audience rose to their feet, clapping thunderously. Emma felt tears sting her eyes, not of pain this time, but of something deeper, vindication. Alexander turned to her. "Come, you don't need to stay here any longer." Together they walked out of the ballroom, the applause following them like a wave. Emma felt the night air on her face as they stepped outside, cool and crisp, carrying with it the scent of freedom. For the first time in months, she could breathe. In the car waiting outside, Emma leaned back against the leather seat, one hand still on her belly. She whispered softly, "We're free now." Alexander, sitting beside her, turned his gaze to her. "You didn't just survive tonight, Emma. You conquered it. You stood in front of the world, and you didn't break." Emma gave a small, tired smile. "For a long time I thought strength meant never falling apart. But I learned, strength is rising even after you've fallen. And tonight, I rose." The city lights glittered outside the window as they drove away, leaving the grand Renaissance behind. But Emma knew the story wouldn't end here. There would be trials, hearings, endless news cycles about Andrew's crimes. But none of it mattered anymore. She had her dignity. She had her child. And maybe, just maybe, she had the beginning of something new, with the man who had stood beside her when she was at her weakest. Weeks later, as the scandal consumed Andrew, Emma's life began to blossom again. She moved into a quiet townhouse surrounded by a small garden, a place filled with peace rather than chaos. The paparazzi still lingered, but gradually their interest faded as new scandals replaced Andrew's. Emma focused on preparing for her child. She painted the nursery walls a soft shade of yellow, filled the shelves with storybooks, and folded tiny clothes with trembling hands. Each task, no matter how small, felt like a step toward healing. Alexander visited often, sometimes to discuss legal matters, sometimes simply to bring dinner and sit quietly in the garden with her. He never pushed, never demanded. He simply stayed, a presence both steady and kind. One evening, as the sun set over the garden, Emma turned to him. "You've done so much for me, Alexander. I don't know how to thank you." He looked at her, his expression gentle. "You don't owe me thanks, Emma. I didn't save you tonight. You saved yourself. I just stood close enough to witness it." Her heart swelled with gratitude, but also something she hadn't felt in a long time: possibility. When the baby finally arrived, Emma held her daughter in her arms, tears spilling freely as she whispered, "You're my new beginning." The room was filled with light, laughter, and love, the very things Andrew had stolen but could never destroy. Months later, news broke that Andrew Weston had been sentenced to prison. His name, once carved in marble across the city, became a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones. But Emma never rejoiced in his downfall. She had no need to. Her victory was not in his punishment, but in her freedom. Standing in her garden, rocking her daughter to sleep under the evening stars, Emma felt peace settle in her soul. She had been betrayed, broken, humiliated, but she had risen, she had transformed, she had claimed her dignity back. And now, as her daughter's small hand curled around her finger, Emma knew the truth she would one day tell her. We are not defined by those who hurt us. We are defined by how we rise after the fall, and we always rise. Because Emma Weston was no longer the woman left behind. She was the woman who rose, stronger than ever, and this was only the beginning. So that's it, my friends. Our story has come to a close. And if you're still here with me right now, listening to every word until the end, it probably means something inside this story touched your heart. Maybe it reminded you of your own struggles, or maybe it gave you hope that no matter how broken we feel, there is always a way to rise again. Emma's journey isn't just about betrayal or revenge. It's about reclaiming her strength. It's about the truth that we are never defined by what others do to us, but by how we choose to respond. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." And isn't that exactly what Emma showed us? She faced humiliation, heartbreak, even despair, but she refused to let those moments define her. Instead, she transformed pain into power. We've all had moments like Emma's, times when life knocked us down, when someone we trusted let us down, when we doubted our worth. But Marcus Aurelius reminded us, the obstacle is the way. What tries to break us can actually become the very path that makes us stronger, wiser, and freer. Emma's story is proof that healing doesn't mean forgetting what hurt us. It means using it as fuel to rise. So if you're walking through something heavy right now, remember this. You are not weak for feeling pain. You are human. Strength isn't about never falling apart. It's about standing back up every time you do. And one day, just like Emma, you'll look back and realize, you didn't just survive. You grew. You rose. If this story spoke to you, if it made you feel seen or gave you strength, then do me a favor. Hit that like button, share this with someone who might need it, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next story that could change the way you see your own life.